Gender and sexuality is one of the biggest ways that we torture ourselves, and it just doesn't have to be if you talk about it.
In this episode, psychotherapist Jack Lambert and relationship coach Shana James join Marc Azoulay to break down the silent struggles, hidden shame, and deep generational divides men face.
We're exposing the truth behind rigid cultural conditioning and revealing how to navigate the deepest fears of family isolation.
I look at my kid and I'm just like, whoa, does not fit or compute in a lot of the ways that I was raised to think. But that doesn't mean that she doesn't exist or all those things aren't valid. There's been a lot of grief looking at other families, whether it's I wish this never happened or I'm afraid my kid is going to die or any of those things that you feel shame around, to find somewhere that you feel safe to talk about things.
There's a tremendous amount of sadness about not being able to have done it earlier or feeling like they lost out or missed something. Stewing in that creates a lot of resentment for the younger generation to have any inkling of interest, sexually or otherwise, that doesn't feel like it fits in the norm. It does send signals that something is wrong, needs to be hidden.
How do you go through those weeds and try to determine what is best for your kid, especially when something you don't understand yourself?
My taboo answer to that is,
hello, welcome back to the Men's Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Marc Azoulay, and we're here with another roundtable. This time, it's on a really, really important topic, and a topic that we get a ton of listener questions about sexuality, and specifically how to support a child or a younger family member that is transitioning, that is exploring their sexuality, that maybe is changing their sexuality or gender from how you used to know them before. It's a big topic. It's an important topic. And I'm really excited to have both Shana James and Jack Lambert come on the show to give some guidance as well as some stories and experiences from their clients' lives and maybe their own lives about what this has been like, because it's something that needs to be talked about, and it's something that is very, very becoming more common in the younger generations, in Gen Z and Gen Alpha. So Shana and James and Jack, welcome to the show.
happy to be here.
Thanks, you.
So you two have been on the show a ton, listeners. We're going to have links to previous episodes in the show notes. We're going to have links to their blogs they've written for Men's Therapy Online. But if you don't know them, let's do some quick introductions. So Shana, if you would kick us off, say a little bit about who you are, what you do, and your experience working with sexuality with your clients.
Yeah, thank you. So I am a relationship and dating coach for the past 20 something years. And I wrote a book called Honest Sex, which has people think like that all I talk about with clients is sex. And I would say most of what I talk about is what leads up to the physical act of sex or, the emotional, spiritual act of sex. So I'm often working with people around communication and how to give and receive love, how to feel, connected to others, whether it's romantic partners or children, family members, conversations that really bring people closer instead of push people away. So I feel really passionate about this since I was a very young child, watching my parents go through and still be in a relationship that I just often shake my head and I don't know what to do with, the suffering that's happening and the lack of understanding and support that's happening there. So that's me.
And listeners, check her out. I mean, a number of clients have worked with her. She's awesome. She gets it. And she's worked with men for like decades at this point and really understands how male sexuality works and how to explain female sexuality to men so that you can have a more loving partnership. Like you're saying, like, it's not just a sex, it's also sensuality, it's also intimacy, it's connection, it's safety, it's all the great things that a great family and a great relationship are built on. So check out Shana. Again, her link will be in the description of the show notes. So Jack, go ahead. Say a little bit about who you are, what you do, and your experience working with sexuality.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Jack Lambert. I'm a psychotherapist in New York. I work predominantly with gay and queer men. So a lot of people think I only talk about sex also, and they're right. But to jump on what both of you are saying, like, of course, it's more than that. Like, it is the connection and all of that. But I pride myself, and specifically, I'll say this on the Sexuality pod, I really pride myself on being able to be a space where men can talk about sex in that way, because I think for a lot of queer people growing up, that is so taboo and so, something to be hidden and not talked about. So it's kind of nice to be able to have a clinical space to be able to talk about that. And we can talk more about the hypersexualization of gay men, which I just joked about earlier and things like that. But especially for, and I say gay and queer men because I talk to bi men, I talk to, trans identified folks as well, that it's really important to be able to have space just to talk about sex and sexuality. And I love talking about it.
Yeah, and this will be a topic that, of course, we're going to dive into. But I feel like, like so many men, right? I imagine the heterosexual world where I'm from, in the queer spaces too, like we don't have language to talk about it in a real way. It's all just like locker room humor, or just like, this like performance mentality, right? Did you get some? Did you not get some? Did you score tonight? Right? Like it's all super, super dumb and really shallow. And I think it means that a lot of guys are uneducated around what like sex even is, right? Let alone what good sex is. So that's another topic we'll be diving into today.
I remember, so hyperbolic, but I remember being in high school and I had an American Eagle shirt that said one night stand on it. And all these boys are like, do you even know what a one night stand is? And I'm like, tiny little gay boy, like, no. It's so funny and this is why I love talking about it, because it's just like, this is usually how people are hearing about it. And it's so shame inducing and so, belittling if you don't feel like you're on the top of everything, that a lot of people just pretend to know what they're talking about. And it gets people into a lot of trouble and locker room talk that really just doesn't land anywhere in anything substantial. It's so fluff.
That just reminds me, I have another high school moment, and I wrote about this in the beginning of my book, where my mom handed me this book, where I come from, or I don't know, one of the, like that cartoon book. I don't know if any of you have seen. And she was like, oh, I meant to give this to you like 10 years ago, I think I was 17 and she meant to give it to me when I was 7. And it was like, oh, okay, right. So there was no education there. And then I remember my sex ed teacher saying, things like, have a good weekend and keep your pants on. And she showed us how to put a condom on a banana, but there was nothing about the intimacy or connection or, right, making it easier to talk about.
For sure. Yeah. Zero education. I'm thinking like, for me, like my parents were basically like, don't get anyone pregnant. That was period. That was all the education I got. And then, like health class, it was mostly like anatomy, which my nerd ass, like, I love that because I liked medical stuff and I liked anatomy. And I was like, I could remember all the different parts of the penis and the vagina, but like, I didn't learn about sex. I just like got like an extra little bio class on top of what I was doing, but and we'll get into this, but so many people are learning from porn. Right. Which, goes without saying. It's like, that's also not sex, right? That's like sexual entertainment, but that's not sexual education. And I think that creates a ton of problems out there in the bedroom.
That is a great distinction, the sexual entertainment versus actual sex.
Yeah. And that's where a lot of young guys are learning. But so there's a lot to talk about. Let's like loop it around to the question that I know the listeners are interested in. Which really is about, again, how to support, how to interact with, how to maybe question compassionately when somebody is exploring a different sexuality or a different gender. So to kind of anchor this conversation, I want to zoom out if possible, and talk about kind of the societal level, because it does seem that this stuff is being talked about more. And I know there were times in history where it actually was more common, which I'm sure you two can speak to, but it seems like, especially for Gen Z, Gen Alpha, like the gender transitioning, the gender queerness, like this is kind of their revolution is the way that I think about it, where I think the millennials, we actually were really spearheading sexual, being gay was becoming more and more normal, right? I think the generation before was questioning things like religion or other types of institutions, but Gen Z and Gen Alpha, it seems like gender is the thing that they're really pushing the boundaries on. So I'm curious what you two think of that, what trends that you're seeing on that kind of like generational or societal level, and how these kids are starting to talk about it. Because I think it's hard for older generations to understand, like there is this like real gap in empathy, I think, and in relatability when someone says, hey, I'm not sure if my, birth sex is what I actually am deep down. That's like, that just like puts up a wall for a lot of people who've never even thought that could be questioned, right? Like it's like outside the realm of possibility for many older individuals.
I mean, first and foremost, just like even saying so often gender and sexuality are just so talked about in the same way, and they are so vastly different and have to do with such different things, like in the same way that we would say, for bisexual folks, like that doesn't mean you are 50% attracted to women and 50% attracted to men. Like there's so much nuance and dimensionality there, like in the same way, like just if you were to identify as female doesn't mean that you are meant to be attracted to men, or just because you're identify as male that you're have to be attracted to women. Like they're so nuanced and so different that I think that's almost the first conversation I would want to have with any young adult exploring this is just like, do you know the difference about these things? Not to be patronizing, but because I think so easily it's talked about in the same way. And to give credit to the younger generation, I think it is differentiated pretty well. But I think in the way that we talk about it, as far as like education, I think it's still so linked in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And as the parent of a gender expansive child she's 14 now, and at 4, this whole thing started, 3 or 4. I mean, it was very, very young. I will say that I really had to be willing to let my brain break. Like my paradigms had to just keep breaking and breaking and breaking, and like to allow the discomfort of not having clarity or not knowing, like, okay, well, where does she fit in society? How are people going to see her? How are people going to view us? Like, it's been a lot, it's been a very intense road. And Jack, I really appreciate what you're saying about the fact that like, there is a wide human spectrum. And even I was raised Jewish. And so at one point I was like, I wonder what, the Talmud or the Torah says about gender. And there are like 7 genders listed there. I mean, it's just even that as what I would see as a more conservative religion. I was like, it's brain breaking when we really see that our brains have been conditioned to view in this binary way. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot more I could say, but I love, Jack, that you brought it back to like asking people, getting curious and having compassion and being willing to really see who is this person in front of me, not in the box that's been given to us. But, I look at my kid and I'm just like, whoa, does not fit or compute in a lot of the ways that I was raised to think. But that doesn't mean that she doesn't exist or all those things aren't valid.
Yeah. So I want to talk about that initial fear they talked about, because I think that's what a lot of our listeners are alluding to when they ask the question, and I think you brought some really good points, right? The idea of like, what does that mean about me, right? What does that mean about our family? What does that mean by, my parenting style, right? Like I think it brings a lot of really intense questions to people. When, like you said, something is breaking their brain and something is outside of their just realm of comprehension. So I'm curious if you could speak to that, and what that fear was like, or other types of, I guess, hard questions you had to ask yourself, or mirrors you had to look in, so that you could be more present for your child.
Yeah. And I think the first thing that comes up for me is the willingness to reflect on my my internal world, my internal discomfort as my own thing, versus making it about my child, right? Because she is happy. I mean, she's walking around in the world. She's got bright blue hair. She's a fiery, girl. Like I actually talked to a psychologist once and I was describing what was going on, and they were like, seems like she's doing fine. Like, I don't actually think there's no need for anything over there right now. There might be someday, but like, sounds like you're the one who's having some struggles trying to understand and trying to know, like, how do I keep my kids safe in the world? And there are places right now that like, I won't take her to Florida. I won't take her to Texas. I won't take her to Idaho. Like there are more places probably in this country that I wouldn't take her than I would. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but those are the first things that started coming up.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is, so it's like the mirror comes on yourself. And I think what you said is critical, right? Like if your kid is happy, isn't that the goal? Isn't that the goal, to have a kid that's happy and confident?
And just to say, Jack, I saw you had something, but just a quick, like, I grew up trying to be likable and trying to fit in, and my kid is not doing that. And so it is really uncomfortable. And, there was one time I remember, like, I gave myself permission not to go to a school picnic or some kind of function, because I was like, everyone was like neurotypical and, cisgender, like all this stuff where I was like, oh, I need sometimes to give myself permission to know that I can keep us in situations that feel safer or that feel a little more, loving and supportive. And I still have to be able and willing to do my own work, to see, why am I struggling in these ways?
The fear component, I think, is a big one, because that's usually, I think, a stem from, if we're talking about how to help, adolescents, young children go through this, like, if we are feeling fear in the way that we're handling that, like, we know that as clinicians, like, we're not going to do our best work if we're activated in a certain way. But a lot of the time, I do feel like our fear is not mirrored by them. Like, they will learn that from us if we, indicate that there is something to be worried about here. And I think that that's, for my side, at least, not as a parent, but as like a clinician who works with younger adults, like making sure that I'm towing the line, Shana, like you talked about, like, if you're going to these places that are very deeply conservative, like, there might be things that you don't feel comfortable doing. And that's not for me to say, like, no, explore yourself, get on there. Like, there's a difference between stretch and tear. Like, sometimes it is like, I'm going to trust you to know what feels safe and what doesn't. And that's a scary thing to say. As a parent, I can't imagine. It's a scary thing to say, talking to a college student or a high school student as well.
I mean, it's terrifying. And yet it's like, I think for any parent, how do we teach the kids the skills of trusting themselves and listening to their bodies and sensing, people in the world around them? Like, I think every parent wants that for their child, right? And not just parents of kids who are gender expansive so yeah, I love bringing it back to that. Like, sometimes it feels like, as a parent, my heart is walking around outside of my body, and I hate that feeling, right, of fear. But I also don't want to add fear or come from fear, because then, like you said, that's what she's starting to, navigate the world with.
And I think with all things, that's like, start with the self, and then you can always assist the other, because if you're having those reactions, like, figuring them out for yourself is always going to be a first step, rather than simply just trying to assist and mitigate the fear in someone else.
100%, right? And that's another shield for therapy, right? Or coaching is like, take a look at that mirror. At least remove your own bias from the equation. I work with more, dads, right? Dads of daughters, heterosexual dudes, heterosexual daughters. And like, this comes up in that world too, where they're like, oh, all men are creeps, right? Everyone's going to be harassing my daughter. There's that kind of like stereotype of like, I'm going to make sure I'm cleaning my shotgun when their first boyfriend comes home, so he knows I'm not fucking around. It's like, you have that. And the first question, I'm like, okay, what's your relationship with women? Like, yes, there are dangerous people out there for sure. But if your mind immediately goes to men are creeps and predators, there's some stuff that you need to probably work on internally. So, to each of your points, that like, you can be the adult in their relationship. You can be that grounded, safe place for them as they do explore. And as they get older, which I know is very hard for parents, and will be hard when my daughter gets older, is like when they get hurt, right? Because like, as much as you can protect them, there will be times where they get hurt, where they get bullied, where they're in a dangerous situation, where like they have a really bad day or they lose a friend, right? Like, that is going to happen. And then I think that's really, really hard. But those are the times where your kids need you the most, right?
Yeah, and they need to know how to have those conversations, right? If you're teaching them fear, they're just building walls around themselves. I remember my kid recently was considering, whether she liked someone or not. And when I heard about this kid, I was like, I don't think he's queer. I think he's straight. And then I was like, danger, danger, and then part of me was just like, okay, chill, mama, calm, like, I had to self-soothe, and I had to realize, right, I've given her, and what we talk about, a lot of the tools to know, what is a safe situation, and to make sure that you have your friends and allies around you, and right, all those things. And it just ultimately is risky. What I think about when we were young, and what they're going through of reaching out and saying, I like you. Do you like me? I mean, God, we still as adults have a hard time.
Yeah, it is. It's like, it's that vulnerability. And it's like, yeah, she's, down the line, she's not going to remember, or it's not going to be as important, like, did that person accept her or not? But it's going to be, hey, was my mom there to walk me through that process? No matter how it goes, right? Whether it's successful or she gets rejected. So I want to ask, which I think is going to be a taboo question, and I got to own my own, like, naive kind of position here. We might have different answers, but what I hear from a lot of my listeners is this kind of distinction of like, how do you know if it's real or not? I don't have like a more nuanced way of saying that, but I think people are curious or wondering like, okay, is this something that my kid is born with that I need to embrace and accept? Is this perhaps part of a mental illness? Is this a fad at the school? And I think it leaves a lot of parents questioning, especially when it comes to things like intervention, right? Whether that's like a hormonal intervention or a surgical intervention. It brings up a lot of questions for parents of how to really tease those things apart. So I know it's not black and white, right? It can't be, but I'm curious your thoughts on if there's any way to even get some kind of bearing on if gender exploration or sexual exploration, right? Like, how do you go through those weeds, right? And try to determine what is actually best for your kid, especially with something you don't really understand yourself.
My taboo answer to that is it doesn't matter if it's real or not, because like I've said it before, I think on my very first podcast, I think, where maybe we're also talking about sexuality, but like or gender and sexuality if your child is changing their gender every other day, then yes, that's something to look at. But the problem is not that they're changing their gender every other day. It's that, well, what's going on around that? Like if your child is definite that they are trans at whatever age, it doesn't matter if that's 100% their truth in that moment. Like, be curious about that. Ask them what they mean by that. Like, they could mean they just want to gender express by wearing, generally female clothing. Like, who knows? But for them, that's trans in what they've heard. Like, it is just about like gathering more information, I feel like. So the reality of it will come out regardless. It doesn't matter if in that initial moment, if it's real or not, because I don't think that's fair to anyone's experience. If you were to ask anyone at any period of time if what they're feeling right now is real, I wouldn't know how to answer that as an adult, truly.
Thank you. That is so good, right? I'm like, of course, right? I would say the same thing, and just to say, like, it is real. Of course, whatever is going on is real for them. And I will say, being part of or having, explored through the medical system also, there are a lot of checks and balances. Nobody's just going to give your kids hormones or do some kind of surgery like willy-nilly. Like, it is, it's just not like that. And it can be painted, the picture can be painted that it is. So I agree with you, Jack, 100%. And I think really, again, listening to your kid, I mean, whether your kid is wearing goth clothes and dark makeup and looks terrifying, or whether it's gender expression or sexuality, it's like, yeah, why isn't the goal as parents that we are just really nurturing these kids and helping them find out who they really are? And I think the time, the middle school, high school time is an exploratory time. I've heard, as I do more listening, I was just reading a book called The Emotional Lives of Teenagers, which is brilliant. And it was like, yeah, I don't think it was from this book, but from another book, it was like, they might change their style or, their friend groups daily, weekly, monthly. Like, again, like you said, Jack, if it's daily, it's probably more of an issue, but they get to explore who they are at this age. We often have ourselves kind of put in a box, by the time we become adults. But if you think back, I mean, for me, I remember I had purple hair once. Like, I didn't do as much exploring as some other kids did, but I actually wanted to. And I think if I was in a household where that was more welcomed and there was more curiosity, I probably would have. And I probably wouldn't be dealing with some of the things in therapy that I am today around why I'm trying to be so likable to people.
That's such a great connection to make too, of just like expression of any sort of sexuality or gender, the fantasy and play around it, and actually like dealing with real world issues. Like what is real there? Like, the reality there is you're working on something. Like, it's not aberration or something to be afraid of. It's, something's being done. And maybe as a parent, I'm curious about what that is.
Or like triggered by it. And again, that's our work to do. Like, I have these memories of my mom saying to me, like, oh, you should put on some lipstick or some blush. Like, you need that to go out in the world. You need to look pretty. And I look at my kids sometimes and I'm like, I really can see where those instincts come from. Like, oh, she'd look a little brighter if she did this or wore her hair in a different way. And I do kind of question that line of like, when do I suggest different clothing or haircut or things like that versus when do I just let her kind of do her own thing? And I've landed I always land, I think, with my clients I work with and my kid and myself, and that middle road where there's a curiosity, maybe some suggestions and a questioning, what's important to you? What matters? Do you care how other people see you? Do you care if you look a certain way to other people? Or are you really just more concerned with feeling good? I mean, sometimes I look at her clothing choices and I'm like, that's not gonna, have her fit in certain ways. And I'm like, well, she doesn't actually, that's not her value right now. She's not trying to fit in. She's trying to be herself. And fitting in was my, co-opted value from when I was young.
And how much of that as parents can be pulled up by just kind of seeing their child do those things. And I do believe what we're saying is sound advice in situations. And part of this is also acknowledging, and this is one of the hardest things to say probably as a parent, but if you cannot rely on yourself to be that safe space, that is the perfect time to get your kid into therapy or coaching or get them someone that you feel like can fill that while you're doing that work. That's the caveat I would make. Don't brush it off and feel like, well, I don't want to deal with this. But I can acknowledge like it takes time sometimes to get to that place or to educate yourself in certain ways. So if it feels like you just can't be that right now, there's even options within that space.
There's like a level of humility being like, you're not going to be perfect. No one's perfect. And like your kid's happiness is the prime directive, and like their well-being. And it's interesting. Like it's how much of pedestal like gender or likability, which I think is like related, or sexuality or attraction, right, is like on this pedestal. Cause I think you're right, which, we talked about like, okay, if they're going to be like a skater for like a couple months and they're going to be a goth and they're going to be a punk rocker and they're going to be a prep. It's like, in my mind, it's like, those are more acceptable, but like gender expression is the same thing. It's a costume ultimately, right? That like conveys something about who you are or you're experimenting with it. But I think it's like, yeah, so many people are insecure about their own gender or have, maybe more accurately have gender trauma where they haven't fit in with other women or other men or others, right? I think we have so many wounding around gender that like it just bleeds into our child, right? Like the makeup thing is a great example where it's like, I would imagine you're like, you need to do this to be accepted as X, Y, and Z, or to not be judged or to be attractive or whatever, right? And like it makes makeup like necessary as a female gender expression versus like maybe it's a hobby, right? We would knock it down. Like maybe she's into it, maybe she's not, but it's like something that comes from a place of joy and interest and skill building, right? Because makeup's freaking hard to do, like it's a place that you can like something you can learn and play with versus something that's like necessary to be in society. But I think, that's a perfect example. And there's so many other examples around gender expression that they just seem like non-negotiable, right? Like as a man, you have to have some level of fitness, right? You have to be like jack. I mean, women too, right? You're supposed to be like skinny and sexy. But I think, for men, like you have to be like athletic in some way, right? Or you have to have muscles or be fast, right? We have all these kind of things that's like, no, you need this or you're going to have a horrible life. And that's an insane amount of pressure to put on a child, right? Like that's hard for a kid to hold all that.
I'm hoping that I didn't come off. I love everything you just said. And I also just want to make sure that I didn't come off as saying something like, because for some people, gender is known, right? It is clear for them. So for those people, I'm not meaning to say it's like putting on different clothing, right? For that person, it is more of an innate knowing, like it is, for me or for other people who are cisgendered. But I think, like you said, for people who are exploring and questioning, that is a way that they get to figure it out.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like, as we're kind of like threading on this, because I agree. I mean, it's kind of like bring it full circle. I think it's about being curious, and I think it's about being that safe place, like you're saying, and really entering your kid's world. What I guess I want to say to our listeners, I've worked with a number of fathers who this has been their exact story, is they had trouble accepting sexual exploration, gender exploration. So they just built a wall. And then that is when their kid acted out, right, in a way that caused damage to them or their family in some way, shape, or form, right? Because it becomes the forbidden fruit, right? And kids, of course, fucking love that shit, right? Like it becomes the thing that they want to do anyway. So instead of not doing it, they're just going to hide it better, right? And then you get those fears of like, which again, I agree, it's like very rare, but like backdoor surgery, right? Or like, they run away from home or they cut off their family, right? Like all these dramatic stories that you hear. I think it's like that story didn't come out of nowhere, right? That story probably took, a decade to get to that point where the kid was not feeling safe in their family, that they had to flee, right? That they weren't able to see their family as an ally for them going through these different things, right? They had to like take a dramatic action because their back was against the wall. So I think as long as you're like there and you're curious and you're asking questions, and maybe you're like, if you have the guts, like you're playing along, maybe you're trying to wear something different and see how that feels, right? Or you're going with them to a queer space just to like check out, what their world is like. If you have the guts to put yourself in an uncomfortable situation for your child, then I think the stuff that people are afraid of, right, the medical intervention specifically, it can wait, right? You can give it some runway, right? So because they don't feel that they need to do it or it's never going to happen, right? They feel like you have an ally. They can take their time. They can talk about it with a therapist, with a doctor, with a community, with a group therapy, right? There's like lots of resources so that if and when they make that decision is coming, it's coming from a place of realness, right? Or purity or logical thought, right? It's not an impulsive decision, right? It's something that they've really, really hashed out.
And you're included in it. Like that's the thing that I'm so grateful for, is because we've been talking about this and my kid feels safe. There is a medical directive, or I don't know what they call it in Oregon, where like she could lock me out of her medical records starting at 14, which I think is insane. But it's also created for the safety of some kids whose parents aren't supportive. I mean, it's very controversial, I think. But, we've had these conversations and I said, like, if you want to, you could lock me out, but I'm on your side. And I think if we can do this together, you're going to have a lot more of what you want. But like you said, I mean, the people whose kids run away, there's a big lack of acceptance and a big, there's a lot of conflict in those families and lack of understanding.
On the note of sexuality from gender, of kind of what I alluded to, like just because you're trans doesn't mean you're like locked into whatever, heterosexual or sexuality that gender experiences. But in those cases, I do think it's different than, being given the puberty book or being given these things. Like part of it is also letting them know, like, I will take your lead. You let me know, I'm happy to talk, but like letting them know the door is open, rather than, I think in some ways the assumption is, like Marc said, I was told don't get people pregnant, and I was never sleeping with women. But that was
irrelevant.
But that was the heteronormative thing.
Yeah.
Like that's the conversation that you have with young men. And so, at the time I was just like, whatever. But it's hard because like that's a microaggression to experience, like, oh, well then this is what I should be doing. Like that's what that's saying in essence. And for trans or gender expansive folks, like that is the perfect time to be able to say, like, you let me know. I'm not going to put any sexuality on you, but I am open to talking about it when you're ready or if you want to. I think that's the version maybe of the puberty book that's more helpful on that end of the spectrum.
And I think having that like humility, right? Just like, again, I think it takes a lot of guts as a parent to be like, you know what? I really don't know about this. And I'm going to do my best to educate. Like maybe you can recommend some books or some YouTube videos or whatever, Instagram people I can follow, because I know a lot of that's out there, right? But like, I'm going to do my part of it, but also like ask questions. Like what can you tell me about this? Because this is something that these kids are talking about a lot, right? They're talking about, for hours, right? Like they're really deep diving. Your kid's going to be more of an expert on like gender and sexual fluidity than you probably ever will be. And if you can, again, come with humility and let your kid teach you something and you're open to learning, right? Well, again, whether it's about this or it's about like their favorite Pokemon, right? It doesn't really matter. It's all just their interest. But I think, again, as gender, we're dying on this hill, but it's like letting your kid bring them into your world and teach you something. It's such an awesome thing for your kid to do too, right? To like have that power just for a moment, kind of switch a little bit and feel like they have something to offer in that department.
I mean, it's so fascinating too, like the term pansexual for people who haven't heard it, it's like basically just being attracted to people, to be like, not because of a specific body or a specific gender. And I just like, it's so beautiful to learn these things actually. And remember having a conversation with a social worker when my kid was young and sex was not, anywhere near in the picture, but I was worried about her sex life in the future. I was like, what's going to happen and how's this going to go? And, and the social worker said, you're thinking of this from a very cisgender heterosexual lens. And I would consider myself like somewhere, again, this is the spectrum, somewhere between heterosexual and bisexual. Like I'm not fully bisexual maybe, but maybe I am. And you're, as you were talking about it, Jack, it's like, but the way I think about things is more heterosexual, I think often. And they were like, you don't even have the framework to understand it yet. Right. So it took me more research and more understanding to be like, oh, when I take this limitation off, or I take this box off, or I even found myself going back into like, well, when relationships first start, they don't usually start with sex. I mean, kids are just finding someone who they feel accepted by, appreciated by, they're having fun with, they feel understood. It's like really the root of relationships is not sex, though sex is important. But I really have started to believe over the years, like people figure it out, people figure out how to have the kind of sex they want to have that makes them feel good. And if there is a struggle, right, there are amazing people like Jack out there who are supporting young people to actually be able to talk about it and have their views expanded to the point where it's like, oh, I do fit some, not a box, but there's a place for me.
To the extent that I'm even learning every day, and I'm pretty in it, I would say, as much as I possibly can be. And there's still things that stop me in my tracks sometimes, or a client will check me on something. I'll say like, yeah, because a perfect example is I have a great friend of mine who is bisexual, and I call them gay 90% of the time. And they have never called me on that, but I have realized over time, like, oh, I'm saying that, and that's not actually how they identify, and rather than feeling like, oh, I did something bad or wrong, which I think a lot of people who are very resistant to like learning these terms or being open to this feel like they're implicitly being told that they're wrong or bad for not knowing these things. Like, it is just like, oh, well, from now on, I'm not going to say that. It's a quick, easy fix, but just even clocking that of saying, even I'm working at a binary of gay, straight a lot of the time. And that so is not the case.
Yeah. And I think just like with any topic, it's like finding safe spaces where you as that naive person, or me as that naive person, can like explore it too. There are people that will police you, but by and large, people are just happy that they're interested in them, right? They're interested in their world. They want to learn. And if you're not a dick about it, right, and you ask questions and they can sense it's coming from a place of actual curiosity, not like veiled judgment, I think people are more than happy to talk about their experience, right? And I think your kid will be too. So I want to, as we're kind of threading on this, I've kind of a composite client that I want to share with you all that kind of speaks to part of the parent experience of this that I think is not talked about enough. So I'm going to, lay it out, and I'm curious how you two would work with this person. I've worked actually a number of people like this. So it's a dad, right, whose kid is transitioning, right? We'll say, the kid was born a male and transitioning to identifying as a female. And I think the part that I really want to focus in on that is not talked about is the grief that the parent feels. And this parent was talking to me about losing this idea of who their child was. This parent was struggling looking at like baby and child pictures, their child wanted to use a different name. And this parent was struggling accepting that because they chose their name of their kid, for a reason. Maybe it was named after another family member, or the name had a lot of meaning to them. And they've always known this person, their kid, by that name. So I think it's hard for parents, when there's a lot of meaning in that name, and they were grieving kind of like the future, the being different, right? Being a lot different from where they were. And I think maybe similar, Shana, to what you were talking about, like their family being different from how they experienced it, and I think it's something that, first and foremost, that's why the first half of the podcast was like, you need, as a parent, your job is to support your child, right? But you also need to get help for yourself, because I think, similar to when you look at like patients and caregivers, right? A lot of attention goes on a patient, sometimes a terminal illness, and the caregivers are often left behind. I think it's like a similar thing where it's like, as a parent, as a caregiver, you're going through your own grieving process. And if that's unchecked and unsupported, it's going to lash out. It's going to hurt your kid, So I'm curious if that gives you all enough kind of data points, right? If there's, composite client we're making up here, how would you speak to a parent that's going through that grief? How would you help them process that grief of a future that is not what they thought it was going to be, and of, in a way, and this is binary, but in a way like losing their child and gaining a new child, right? Which is bittersweet in some ways. I think it's very difficult for parents to go through that shift.
I feel like I have to let you take this one.
Really? I was going to say the same. I'm like, maybe I should. I mean, I'm happy to dive in. I just feel like, right, as the clinician, I feel like you have more, varied experiences. But
I'll be brief, at least, just to say, like, because my answer is kind of short and simple and boring, which is just to say, like, yeah, allow that grief to be there. That makes sense that grief is there. Like, I imagine there will be shame around the grief for wanting to, like, support their child, but also feeling like that they're experiencing this grief and having some complex feelings around that. Just acknowledging that that's there, I think is the best thing that you can go to, and just saying, yeah, like giving them context for why that's there and to allow them to process those things. Because the last thing I would want as a clinician is for them to process that purely with the child, because then that is really triggering and really traumatizing. But at the same time, those feelings are valid. They make sense. I understand why they're happening, and they do need a place to go.
Yeah, and I think that's the impulse, is to tell your kid about it, right? And this is, I think, one of those things in therapy where it's like, don't be always open, right? You don't have to be always open and honest. And the way that I talk to, these clients is like, your kid is like a baby bird. And like, especially if they're their new gender identity, this new person, this new kid, right? New name, whatever, right? It's like a baby bird, and they need to be fed. Right. They're not ready to like be challenged. They're not ready to be pushed out the nest. They're not ready to be like pushed into something they're not ready to. Right.
Not
like,
ready to be pushed out of the nest to fly.
Or be like, time to start doing pull-ups, baby bird, you're gonna have to fly soon. Right. It's like right now your job is just to feed that baby bird and like nurture until that baby bird gets strong enough. And then, maybe whatever it is, 5, 10, 15 years down the line, it's a conversation when they are an adult and their gender identity is solidified. You can talk about your version of it if your relationship with your child is like that. But I think early on, it's like, you got to go to someone else, whether that's a therapist or a spouse or a support group or something, right? Friends, not something to put on your kid, because it's going to crush that little baby bird before it has a chance to fly.
And even for, I have plenty of clients who were, cis folks, cisgender, of the gender of their birth, and came out as gay or, such later in life when they're, we could say, more fully formed adults. And their first reaction from their parents or their loved ones was, I'm so scared for you, or I can't believe I'm never going to see you like marry a woman and have kids and all these things. And again, like, those are valid feelings to have and valid reactions to have, but to have that be the initial reaction is really painful, even for an adult or a fully formed person.
That's what I'm talking about it. And Shana, I'll move to you in a moment. But yeah, I'm thinking about one client in particular who was like, who had the, born male child, transitioned to female. And he was like, I'm never going to get to like play baseball with my kid, right? I'm never going to get to like do sports. I'm like, why? Like, tons of women play sports. Like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean, dude? Like, you can still teach your kid baseball. It's like, but I think the binary is so strong that I think people think, kind of to your point earlier, right? Like separating out gender and sexuality. It's like, just because someone is exploring, it doesn't mean that like they're no longer the other thing, or that all these hobbies and interests and styles are all connected, right? Like, you can still have the relationship with your kid that you want, even though they're exploring their gender, But I think people jump to those conclusions, right? Of like, we're never going to get to go with monster trucks together. It's like, you could still go check out some monster trucks.
Your cis boy may hate monster trucks and may just be into music and reading, right? Like, we don't get to have the children we want to have. We get to have the children, who mirror all of our likes and dislikes. Like, that's been a huge lesson for me. And I would say where some of my grief has been is like, right, oh, I thought I was going to have a kid who was really similar to me, and we were going to, I don't know, do all these things. Now I'm finding that there are certain ways that they're similar, but they're happening in different ways than I thought. I mean, it's just wild. But like, there's been a lot of grief, like I said, of looking at other families and having this imagination that because they look a certain way, because they look more typically normal or neurotypical, that their life is, better in a certain way. So I love what you're both saying. It's like we have to talk about the grief. We have to find a place where we feel safe to really explore it and to say the things that we think we should never say, whether it's, I wish this never happened, or I'm afraid my kid is going to die, or like any of those things that you feel shame around, like Jack is saying, to find somewhere that you feel safe to talk about things. Because I think through that, then we get to the deeper layers of love and acceptance and understanding. If we're still wrestling with, not that we fully stop wrestling with the grief, but if that's the main event, then we don't have a lot of space for that compassion and nurturing, like you said.
Yeah, I give it to my guys. It's like there's a fake it till you make it thing of like, again, your job is primarily as a parent is to be that supportive, right? To feed that baby bird. And then, I'll see you every week and we can talk about like what's going on underneath the surface. But again, it's the same. I think it's the same as any other parenting task where there's things where you just have to like do it. You just have to show up for your kid, even though it's uncomfortable and confusing because they're looking to you to be the adult in the room, and then you kind of have to like catch up later with your emotions because life comes at you fast.
Yeah. I was wondering if I was going to say this. Parents might judge me, but I've started, my kid humor is one of her love languages. I think, even though that's not listed classically as one of the 5, but I love stand-up comedy. And so like, as she's getting older, we're starting to listen to more and more comedians. And I'm finding that it's actually a really amazing way for her to learn things about sex and gender. And some of the things are like, we'll hit something where I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I should turn this off. Or I'll say to her, like, do you want to hear about this? And she's like, if she says yes, I'm like, okay, this is like a little odd and uncomfortable to listen to with my kid. But then I have an entry point to be like, well, I know they were talking about this, but here's what's most important. Or, there was some comedy, it was talking about sex in a certain way. And it gave me a chance to say, okay, I just want to put in a little plug as a reminder that the most important thing, right, is how you feel with this person, that you feel safe, that you can actually open up and that they respect your vulnerability, right? It's like whatever doorway you have, even if it seems like an odd one or seems like one that, it's a little taboo, like you get to use that and you get to have these conversations with your kids that feel appropriate, nurturing, educational, right? And then there are other people, like you're saying, who we get to just fall apart with. I have 2 support parent groups. I can call the social worker at any time, in the clinic that we go to. It's like there's so many people. And every time I go to an event, I meet someone who has a gender-expansive kid. If I'm willing to open up once I feel safe or once I get a sense that this person is trustworthy, it's wild how often I find people that I can talk about this with.
As we keep digging through these kind of taboo topics, I want to ask another one that, so we talked about on this podcast, the real shit. And Jack, this is kind of relates to the blog you wrote for us a few months ago, which is about, someone in their midlife exploring sexuality and gender, and I see this with this group too, right? It's like you're seeing your kid break boundaries, right? Trying new things, being more confident and free. She had to go to saying where she's fine, right? She's totally fine how she is. And it starts to bring up things in you, right? That maybe you're not as hetero as you think you are, right? Maybe you're not as, cisgendered as you thought you were. And I hear this from parents with gender-expansive kids. I hear it a lot with parents with neurodiverse kids where it's like, oh, my kid got diagnosed on the spectrum or ADHD. And like, I probably am too, because we know the genetic component, I think that the kids are trailblazing new options for parents. So I'm curious if how would you work with this client, or if you work with someone similar who has seen their kid, pressing these boundaries and coming with new creative ways to express their gender and sexuality, and then start thinking about their own in a way that, can be, I think, destabilizing initially, but hopefully ultimately freeing.
I mean, I think in the same way that Shani, you were talking about like finding a common shared interest, I think that there's a lot to be said for just that acknowledgement. It doesn't have to be someone later in life saying, oh, I exactly identify like you too, because I think that can be daunting for a parent who feels like they should be the one who knows, the most, who should be the parent. To kind of just have that be their curative moment. but to say, what are the things that we join on? What are the things that we can learn from each other? At a certain point in parenthood, you can kind of get that balance. And I think most of the times it's usually parents of teenagers around the age where you kind of start to find some of these things. But I guess you didn't bring this up, but I want to point it out because it's the thing that I do see with clients like this who are kind of not activated, but who realize and who feel a deeper understanding of themselves through being able to see just this generation interact with gender and sexuality in a different way, is that there's a tremendous amount of sadness about not being able to have done it earlier, or feeling like they lost out or missed something. And, I can say, like, all of this is a valid reaction. I understand where that comes from, but I do think that gets in the way more than it helps. Like, we can process that, but stewing in that really creates a lot of resentment for the child or for the younger generation, or for, and being able to kind of like breed that jealousy into something that can be really destructive. So I would definitely kind of say, like, this is someone that can hopefully experience joy in different parts of these things in small incremental ways, rather than feeling like they need to jump headfirst into an identity or into a quote unquote lifestyle, because that's also the pressure that I hear along with the jealousy.
Totally. Yeah. I think there's envy for some people, right? And there's also that fear that again, I'm speaking mainly from working with dads and men. It's like, if I expressed myself this way, I would get beat up, right? Or like, it's just like not allowed, right? And it's like, the world has changed, and like, yes, bullying of course still happens. You still got to protect your kid, but like, by and large, in some ways it's cooler to like be more confident and to like be yourself, like, it's not, being a nerd is very different nowadays than it was when you were growing up. Right. And I think about that as something to like encourage, be happy about. But I'm flashing on a client now, which is, I guess maybe as an example of this, I don't know if there's a point to this, but he was talking about, he's a girl dad, right? And he was talking about how, by having daughters, he learned he really loves braiding his daughter's hair. Right. And to the point that he's like, he took some like night classes at like a salon to learn how to cut their hair, and he's like really into it. Right. And it was something that he never thought in a million years he would be into, like styling female hair. Right. But what comes up to him, because I think there's so much just like homophobia, right, in male culture in America, that like he's afraid to even talk about that with other parents, because he doesn't want people to think he's like a predator, or that he's a creep, or that he like likes young girls, or he wants to like make them into Barbie dolls. Like, there's like all this like shit on top of it, which is like, it's what we're talking about. It's such a beautiful thing. It's like awesome. You're connecting with your daughters through their hairstyling, and like they enjoyed and you enjoyed, and there's something creepy about it. But like there's so much shame for him even just to connect on that level. And that's just another kind of like nail in the coffin of male isolation, right? Where there's just things that like we can't even talk about because it's quote gay, right? It's homophobia that gets in the way.
Even on the reverse of that, that's so funny you say that, because I had a client who, came out later in life who really, and the reason I even say this at the inverse is he jumped in head first. He felt like he had missed out. So he's going to circuit parties. He's going out to all these bars. He's doing these things. He's trying drugs for the first time. He's engaging in a lot of behavior that would be unsafe given, his lack of knowledge about what he was doing. And I really just talked to him because he seemed so miserable. And I was like, this is a time when you're able to like find an inkling of something, like there's usually joy here. And I just don't see any of that happening for you. And he really was talking about it, and just he wanted to be in a bowling league. And he's like, I really like bowling. Like I just, there's not a lot of places to do that. So we found him a gay bowling league, and he tried to, but he just traditionally was like, but that's not what gay men do. They don't go bowling. And it's similar to your, like, I'll never teach my child how to like throw a baseball. It's like, people are people. You're going to find people doing everything in every walk of life. It's okay to not have, to have you be part of like the stereotypical predominant culture. That's not going to take away from your experience or invalidate who you are. And again, as adults, we like to think that we just know that. But I think so often it gets muddled by, all of these normative behaviors, regardless of if it's heteronormative or cisnormative or whatnot. Like, there's a lot to be said for just saying, what do I want? and I always say incremental, because I'm like, it doesn't have to be the end result immediately. Find a common interest. If we're talking about like you sharing an identity with a child, find something you like if it's just about you wanting to branch out, and like see if there's any intersection there.
Yeah, right. It's like life is short, man. Like just like live your life.
Life is short.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's so crazy how like just how strong this is, right? Your example is perfect, right? It's like gay people don't bowl, and yet there's a gay bowling league. So like there's at least enough of them to like start a league, Yeah. It's not that weird. But I think there's so many barriers, and there's so many barriers to people just like being themselves out there right now.
And I want to go back to the, if your kids, let's say, expression or exploration of sex, right? If you start to think, whoa, there are things sexually that I haven't done that I want to do, or that is another thing. Like I love talking to clients about, well, what do you actually want? What would turn you on? What would light you up? And the difference between some things we can have fantasies about that actually are great to remain in the realm of fantasy or just sort of that internal exploration. And some things we actually do want to enact with another person or with a partner. And then again, this is why I think we were joking before about most of talking about sex isn't actually about the physical act of sex itself, because it's like, oh, do you have a relationship with a partner where you would feel safe to say, maybe I do want to try and be a little more dominant, or maybe I do want to try and surrender, or maybe, and there are safe places to go play and try these things out. But if you're in a long-term relationship, right, how do you actually have these conversations with a partner? And I think first you have to come back to, am I so ashamed that I'm just going to either defend or apologize? Or can I spend some time working through my shame, getting right with my desires, my needs? Then I can actually have that conversation with a partner.
To me, that is one of the greatest things to stop from cheating. If you're not in an open relationship, because otherwise it will be so taboo and so, the bad thing, that it's going to be so sought after in a covert way that it something that could definitely have been a discussion with your partner about, something sexually that I'm interested in becomes either cheating or behavior to be hidden. And it sends you down this path again of like guilt and shame, when again, sex should be hopefully joyful, at parts, like that, rather than feeling like it has to be so hidden or covert. I say that because I recently had a client who I've seen for a long time, in straight, cis man, who admitted that he likes masturbating with other men and has been doing it covertly without talking to his partner. And it took a long time for him to talk to her about this. And she was completely open to it. She thought, she was fascinated by it. She was so interested. She thought that he was coming out to her as gay. He had to, walk through the process of how like he was worried that he was gay, but doesn't identify as, there was so much healing that actually happened because the reaction wasn't what he thought it was going to be, which was just, you're gay, we're breaking up, I hate you, this is disgusting. It was, I'm so curious about this, where did this come from, and being able to like kind of have that rupture repair moment is, I could truly talk for an hour just about that, straight men engaging in what possibly could be deemed as homosexual behavior, because I think that is part of what is so distressing to people, is like to have any inkling of interest sexually or otherwise that doesn't feel like it fits in the norm. It does send signals that like something is wrong, needs to be hidden. I need to find a way to do this, but I need to hide it from everyone.
100%, right? And the idea that like all this is a spectrum, right? Whereas I think if you're looking at sexuality like a binary too, it's and because of homophobia, right? People don't want to go anywhere near the other end of the spectrum, right? And then, like you said, it just gets like flavored with all this forbidden fruit shit, and then it just gets crazier and crazier and crazier, and so more self-destructive, right? There's like a level of like self-sabotage and self-destructive and risky behavior because there's shame attached to it, instead of being like accepted and integrated into like, hey, this is just my sexual expression, not hurting anybody, it's all consensual, like go for it, man. Again, like life is short, like just do what you want to do.
Which and I can like smile and laugh about it now because we've gotten to that point, but it really was like, it was traumatizing for this person to like sit with the knowledge that he was even interested in this a little bit, and felt like he was carrying it around constantly with him. And it's, when we think about the ways that we torture ourselves, I always kind of like to check in with people and say, like, gender and sexuality is one of the biggest ways that we torture ourselves. And it just doesn't have to be if you talk about it, like, as always, incremental steps, but talking about it goes such a long way.
Well, we're near the end of this roundtable. I think we keep going for another couple hours, and I'm sure I know we're going to have you both back on. So there's a lot of threads that we can pull for next time we're there. But I'm curious from each of you if there's one kind of like final message, right, about all this. I know we've covered a lot here. Maybe one final piece of advice. Someone that's been listening to this show and is really inspired. That's ready to like take a risk, take an emotional risk, and try something new around this topic of gender and sexual expression. What would you tell that person? Well, what is one thing they can do, or one thing they can think about, or one, kind of baby step that they can take to start to chip away at some of their resistances to this?
I'm just thinking that a great baby step would be, it's like exploring the box that you've been living inside of, or what you've been taught, right? Sometimes it just seems like reality is this way. Reality is binary. Reality is black and white. And yet it's like, oh, the fact that there have been 7 genders in the Talmud, or that, most cultures have an expression of more genders. It's like starting to go back and look at, well, what started putting you inside the box can be helpful just first, right, for yourself. And then, or starting with some of those, like, what are the things that are most triggering to me, and starting to explore why are they triggering to me, right? Is it a memory I have from my past? Is it a lesson that I learned? Is it more just kind of free floating in the culture? But really just starting to look at yourself and question your own thoughts and positions to see that those aren't just reality.
Yeah, just to piggyback off that, like all those different genders, so you almost didn't have history, right? Like not only were they acknowledged, they were considered divine. They were actually considered like above like the standard binary, right? Both in like Jewish tradition and Native American traditions, and even ancient Greek and Roman tradition, which is like the birthplace of Western culture. Like it's been there. It's been there for a long time. And in Asian traditions, like these were considered like divine expressions and people that were closer to the spiritual realm in many ways. So like it's so different now, right? Where it's like there's this kind of hierarchy where the hierarchy used to truly be flipped.
Trans has been around forever, is what I always like to say. Like whether it be two-spirit or 7 genders in the Talmud, like these things have existed, and I'm always cautious. I think of talking on podcasts such as this, where it's like I can't say that the audience is going to be receptive to all of this. Some of the things that we call taboo, some people might roll their eyes and be like, "That's old hat." Some people might be like clutching their pearls. My intent is not to have everyone suddenly like just accept this wholeheartedly and all be on the same page. But, in the same way that kind of Shana, you're talking about, like, be curious about this. Like, I would say if you listened through any of this and there was anything that made you feel like tight in the chest or flushed or have a response or a reaction, like, I would just look at that. You are under no obligation to change your opinion or feelings around that. But I would be, as I encourage all my clients to be, just curious about what that reaction is and where, like you said, where that might come from, and just to clock it and to know it, because that's the easiest way to stop yourself from having all this unintended bias or reactions that you don't even know where they're coming from, which I think can be really scary for anyone, to feel like they're just having a reaction to something and feel like it's just kind of out of their control.
Yeah, the mindfulness piece is critical, right? Like notice, like, yeah, is this something from your past, or where's that coming from? And my suggestion, Shana, is actually, kind of off of yours and what you talked about earlier, which is listen to some queer stand-up comics. There's an awesome comedy tradition in the queer world. And like, I think that's a really accessible way to like start to empathize, and start to understand about that culture and understand about their experience of the world, that like doesn't feel like, if you're sensitive, doesn't feel like lecturing or proselytizing or anything, right? It's funny, right? So it's someone that's like entertaining you, but they're also talking about their life experience. And I think it has like just enough of the edge sanded off that it can often go in a little bit better, and make it feel more human, for lack of a better term there. So I think that's a really great way to learn about different cultures in like a fun, just kind of like casual way. So check some of those out. There's tons on YouTube, tons on Netflix, right? Go, and if you want, go to a local, gay bar or something, right? And see if there's an open mic night, and just like listen to people talk, and you might start to enjoy it. You might start to enjoy these people. And kind of what we're talking about during this show is like feel some level of connection and human empathy, because at the end of the day, we're all just people, and we might have different colors of paint, but like the experience, the emotional world is very similar for most people. So I want to thank you two for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And we're looking forward to next time. So as we're wrapping up, you can say a little bit about where people can find you if they want to, read more of your work, learn more about you, or work with you. So Shana, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah, my website, Shana James Coaching, and Shana is Shana. You can find my podcasts. There are some quizzes there about if you're looking for love, what could be blocking you, or if you're in a relationship, why you may not be having the best love and sex of your life. I generally work with people over 40 because that's where I am now. And I feel like, people come to me, they feel comfortable with me. But in general, anyone who is struggling in your love or sex life, whether you're single and don't want to be, or you're in a relationship and something's not feeling as connected or intimate as you want. Those are the people I tend to work with. Though after this conversation, I would say if you are a parent of a kid who is gender expansive, I'm totally open to having those conversations and supporting, the journey in that way.
Great. And Jack?
Yeah, JackLambertLMHC.org is my website. I'm Jack Knows Best on Instagram. And same, I've got, plenty to offer as far as like consultations or just chatting about things. Like I think one of the biggest things I hear from people is I wanted to reach out, but I didn't want to just start therapy with you completely. I'm like, this doesn't have to just be therapy. I have plenty of people that I just chat to about certain things, or like I said, parents who just want to have like a couple sessions just to chat about getting more information about things. I'm totally open to that as well. And can't wait to be on the next one.
Awesome. And all of our stuff is at menstherapy.online. So check out our website. We have tons of blogs, tons of podcasts, many that feature these two wonderful individuals. And we have a free Slack community where you can join and just talk. So, kind of piggybacking off of what Jack said, if you're not ready for therapy or don't have the money for it, don't have the time for it, like join the community, right? Like we're not, that famous. Like you can just email us. You can just talk to us. Like we're very, very accessible. But we need to know that you're interested first, right? So, reach out. The Slack is a great way to do that. Email is a great way to do that. And just kind of start to dip your toe in this world of self-exploration and self-help. So again, everything you need to know, everything is at menstherapy.online. So thank you so much for tuning in. And we'll see you next week on an episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast.